Hi everyone, it's me again. It's time for yet another game review. In the last one, I kicked off the Ratchet & Clank marathon by taking a look at the first game, released in 2002, and exploring what made it an incredible start to this iconic game series. Its unique storytelling for a platformer, satirical humor, interesting universe, excellent aesthetics, explosive roster of weapons, and challenging yet perfectly fair mixture of combat and platforming set pieces made the game stand out from the crowd and instantly set up Ratchet & Clank as a staple of PlayStation and gaming as a whole. However, it wasn't perfect since it had a few minor control and difficulty balancing issues that made it prime for improvement in a sequel. As you can tell by the title of the video, Ratchet & Clank was critically and commercially successful enough to receive a continuation, which is what we'll be looking at in today's review. Truth be told, Insomniac was actually confident enough in the series' success to start thinking of ideas for a sequel while the first game was still in production. Though to be fair, this is pretty standard for video games. When it comes to making sequels, developers usually go one of two routes. They can take the same general gameplay template and do something new within that framework, or clean up what didn't work, all the while expanding upon what did. Insomniac did what they had done previously with the Spyro series and focused on the second route, streamlining and improving the formula from this first game, all the while adding new things that would be both impressive and add a lot to the game. 10 months later, in November 2003, the world would receive Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, also going by Ratchet & Clank Locked and Loaded, or simply Ratchet & Clank 2 in other regions. In this video, I'll refer to it as Going Commando or Ratchet 2 for simplicity's sake. For many, this is when the Ratchet series truly reached greatness. The first game has its fans, myself included, but at the time of release to even now, Going Commando was always regarded more highly than its predecessor. It remains one of the series' fan-favorite outings, right up there with Ratchet & Clank 3 or A Crack in Time, with many even labeling it as their favorite in the series, period. As for me, I first played Going Commando in very early 2020. I had just finished, well, I had actually stopped playing Ratchet & Clank 1 at the final boss and wouldn't beat it until over the summer. I don't know, I guess Shrek was just too hard for me or something. Anyways, I would start playing Going Commando soon after experiencing the first game. Almost immediately after starting it, I pretty much knew that I liked it more than the first one, and by the end, that was only set in stone. This game is really what made me a fan of this series, and it's what truly convinced me of how great it was. Shortly following that, I would play a certain other game in the series that was even better, and truly solidified this series as one of my favorites, but that's a story for another video. Like I said in the last review, I've always liked Ratchet 1, but it was more of a tough love back then, if that makes any sense. Going Commando, on the other hand, was a hell of a lot of fun. It wasn't perfect, as no game is, but it quickly became one of my favorite PS2 titles. Not that it has a boatload of competition for that title, but still, I would end up revisiting these games again in 2021, and I find myself gaining a deeper appreciation for the original. I would of course revisit all the sequels shortly afterwards, and now a year later after that, I'm finally doing videos on them like I've wanted to since then. So now the question remains, has my initial opinion on its sequel, Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, changed at all? My simple answer to that question is yes. I like it even more than I had before, and that's given how fun my first playthrough was. As I implied just a second ago, I wouldn't call it my favorite game in the series, let alone my favorite PS2 game, but it's certainly up there. So let's waste no more time and get into it. The story of Ratchet & Clank Going Commando starts immediately where the previous game left off, a standard going forward for these games. Whereas other game series typically have plots that are more or less disconnected with each other, Ratchet & Clank has an overarching narrative from game to game. Having something like this isn't necessary, but they still went out of their way to do it, and I appreciate the effort. Following Ratchet & Clank's victory over Chairman Drek in the last game, the two heroes have temporarily retired, living together in Ratchet's garage. The two can even be seen playing either this game or the last one on the title screen, which is pretty neat. The dynamic duo are interviewed by a show called Behind the Hero, and as soon as the first cutscene, you can notice some changes.
Well, as you can imagine, we've been pretty busy. After Drek's defeat, there were parades, press conferences, fancy dress balls.
And the wiener roast at Al's.
Oh yeah, that. And then things started to slow down a bit.
Yeah, you heard that right. Ratchet now has a new voice actor. In Ratchet 1, he was voiced by Mikey Kelly. Kelly's portrayal was criticized for being unlikable because of reasons I brought up in the previous video. On the whole, I personally thought he did a fine job, but I have to admit, some of his deliveries were a bit overdone, kinda like Spyro from the first game in that series. For the sequel, Insomniac listened to the criticism and got a new actor for Ratchet. Of course, I'm referring to James Arnold Taylor, who would go on to voice Ratchet for the rest of the series. Admittedly, it was a bit weird hearing him after spending hours playing the first game, but you get used to it very quickly. If you ask me, this change was for the best. Again, no offense to Mikey Kelly, but I personally find the direction of Arnold Taylor's Ratchet to be more likable and fitting, especially after both he and Clank went through their character arc and became friends in the previous game. After going through that, Ratchet has matured a lot, and that's reflected in his more chill and calm personality. That said, he's still very much a teenager and has the occasional wisecracker moment of immaturity, but it feels very much in line with his new characterization. Anywho, as the two are talking, we cut to a businessman watching the show in the distant Bogon Galaxy, who teleports them to a ship. This is Abercrombie Fizzwidget, the CEO of the fittingly named Megacorp. As it turns out, the galaxy is in trouble, and Fizzwidget teleported Ratchet and Clank here so they can help save it. A top-secret biological experiment was stolen from Megacorp's laboratories by a mysterious masked thief, and Fizzwidget needs Ratchet to go and catch him. Meanwhile, Clank will be given a job as the head accountant for the company, complete with an apartment in Megapolis. The duo agree, and Ratchet undergoes 2 weeks of training while on his way to Bogon. Afterwards, he dons a suit of armor and pursues the thief to a flying ship on the planet Aranos. So, as you can clearly see, the game has a very straightforward plot, and will in no way have several twists and turns that completely flip everything I just told you on its head. Ratchet makes his way through the flying lab he's landed on, battling these weird robot guys with chainsaws for arms. He eventually manages to come across the experiment situated by itself in a small room, only for the thief to appear and escape through a chute. He's then seen making a deal with the hitman group called the Thugs for Less. Can I just say, the idea of a hitman hotline being casually up for hire in this galaxy is incredibly funny in its own right. The thief hires them to take out Ratchet so he can't get his hands on the experiment. Ratchet then pursues the thief through several more planets, eventually having to save Clank from being held hostage by him. And once the two are together again, they continue to give chase and make sense of what's going on. And that's the basic setup for Going Commando. If I'm honest with myself, I think this is my favorite story in the series in terms of the actual plotline. What I just described to you may not have sounded too interesting, but it ramps up as the game goes on. That said, it still manages to create a decent amount of intrigue right off the bat. Who's this thief you're pursuing? What is the experiment? Why did the thief want it? Again, all these questions and more will of course be answered later on, just as they are in any good story. For now, it's relatively straightforward, and even with that, I still find it incredibly entertaining. Going Commando continues the standard for cutscenes and presentation that the last game set for the series. Like that game, it features cutting-edge animation for the time of release and extremely well-written humor. It may not be as laugh-out-loud hilarious as the previous game, or a certain future game especially, but it's still funny, charming, and is the trademark wit and satire the series is known for. Megacorp is the embodiment of all the problems with excessive capitalism, and it essentially has a monopoly on every single industry in Bogon. Everything in this galaxy revolves around Megacorp, as the Megacorp HQ is on a planet in the center of the galaxy and all the other ones orbit around it. Man, I love this series' attention to detail. Like the first game, it's full of dry and cynical social commentary, and I absolutely love it. I found myself laughing at numerous points in these cutscenes, especially the commercials and moments with the side characters, such as the Desert Riders, Slim Cognito, or the Thugs for Less CEO.
Get lost, for I flatten your robot into a hubcap.
Touch him, and it's Plasma City!
Oh gosh, you didn't have to yell. Why did he have to yell?
A secret shipment that large can only mean one thing. Megacorp is up to no good. I will confront them as soon as possible and demand a bigger cut of the action.
These are just a few of the products we've rejected to help keep you safe. The Tiny Tot Slingshot, the Nuclear Mousetrap, self-wedgifying underwear, and the Lawn Ninjas. So the next time your toaster doesn't explode in your face, say a little thank you to the Megacorp Testing Facility.
We've got more moonstones.
No, you have not.
What?
Existence is a lie. Sensations are illusions. Possessions are merely visions.
All right, I've got an illusion of some moonstones. I'll trade it for a vision of that hypnomatic part.
You have learned much, young one.
Even small background details, such as including a picture of Jack and Daxter, managed to make me chuckle. I like when games include stuff like that, since it shows the developers had a lot of fun making the game, something I can clearly tell is the case with this title. Along with the well-done plot and presentation, Going Commando is well within the series' high aesthetic standards as well. While it may not be as immediately groundbreaking as the first game by proxy of coming out a year later, this game still looks great for the system it was released on and manages a very appealing aesthetic. The adventurous scope is carried over from the first entry with flying colors, and we get a collection of expansive locales with incredible art direction to go along with that. Like Ratchet 1, Ratchet 2's world building is also emphasized, and each place feels like places the citizens of Bogon really live or visit, such as the Mock Tower Resort, Megapolis, the Megacorp Armory, Algon City, and more. One of my favorites is probably Barlow, a desert planet that houses the remains of Gadgetron in the Bogon Galaxy. They were run out of business here by Megacorp years ago, and the facility reflects this. It looks appropriately abandoned, dead, and gives me serious Portal 2 Chapter 6 and 7 vibes. I also love the setting of Smalt, smoke. A huge storage facility miles above the foggy ground is an awesome idea in itself, and this stage executes it insanely well. The weird texture pop-in from the original also seems to have been fixed, and I didn't notice any such thing throughout the game. Going Commando even makes several improvements to the visuals of the last game as well. For one, the video options help to make the aesthetics age far better. It supports both widescreen and progressive scan, or 480p resolution. Props to Insomniac for adding those things, since so few PS2 games actually support them, not even the original game. With 480p, the image doesn't flicker at all and upscales far cleaner to HD with the OSSC. The widescreen view does affect the camera a little bit since it just crops the image to fill the screen, but I nonetheless found it to be perfectly playable and only got in the way in a handful of moments sprinkled throughout the game. My only real nitpick with the graphics is the fact that most levels seem to be set in factories, cities, or other types of industrial areas, which limits the location variety somewhat, but even those levels look quite appealing. Pound for pound, Ratchet & Clank 2 has some of the nicest visuals on the PS2. Coming with these great visuals is another fantastic soundtrack to add to the series catalog. David Bergeau returns to compose for Ratchet 2, and he did a fantastic job here as well. I personally still prefer the music from the original game because I generally find the melodies more catchy and memorable. The unique style also helped the songs stand out, as opposed to the more cinematic style music this game introduced. I'm not saying Going Commando has uninspired music or whatever, but it's slightly less immediately striking than the more synthesizer-heavy tracks from the original. Again, it's still great music though, and the game has several hits that I well and truly enjoy. Ratchet 2 features a healthy combination of atmospheric songs and more exciting and up-tempo ones, and the composition is plainly well done. So why not have a listen to some of my favorites so you can see what I mean? Again, if you ask me, all this is great stuff and perfectly fits the atmosphere of the game itself. It makes the game that much more enjoyable to play. Speaking of which, let's talk about how the game plays. Naturally, since this is a direct sequel to Ratchet & Clank, it carries over the same gameplay formula. Each level is based on a mixture of platforming and third-person shooting, which you do using gadgets and weapons you collect, either by buying them or finding them within a stage somewhere. For killing enemies, you're rewarded bolts, which, like the last game, incentivizes you to fight every last one of them, because you'd be losing out on money if you didn't. Going Commando takes this formula and does what any worthwhile sequel does. It takes elements from the first game that weren't the greatest and improves upon them, all the while expanding on what worked. Chief among these things has to be the control and physics system, both of which have seen a major overhaul here. If you recall, my issue with the control in Ratchet 1 was two-pronged. One, he was too slippery and tended to slide around when you held neutral after walking to come to a stop, and two, there was no way to strafe to dodge enemy attacks until halfway through the game. Once you did get the ability to do so, you still had to come to a complete stop to use the mechanic, leaving you open for damage for a split second, and was mostly useful for open areas with crowds of enemies as a result. Ratchet 2 does the logical thing and improves on this tremendously, as I said, and it completely eliminates any control issues that existed in the first game. I swear, it's actually the kind of mechanical improvement you can instantly feel within nanoseconds of starting the game. When I started playing this game for the first time and got control of Ratchet, the first thing I thought to myself was, now that's more like it. You hold either L2 or R2 to lock yourself forwards, allowing you to attack enemies and dodge out of the way of their attacks simultaneously. Using the flip move also allows you to dodge while strafing, something you couldn't do in the last last game, further making combat less janky in general, complete with the same satisfying flip sound effects as the double jump. The dodge mechanic still existed in the first game, but you had to crouch, then jump and hold the analog stick in the direction you wanted to flip, which is finicky to do. It's for this reason that I rarely, if ever, use these mechanics in that game. In Ratchet 2, by contrast, I jump and flip out of the way of enemy attacks constantly. The move also has a lot of offensive potential, as it gives you shots a bit more height, so you can hit enemies that are right above you more easily. The addition of strafing also completely eliminates any issues with those weird sections that almost seemed designed to run it last time, where you're in a hallway and enemies pop out from behind objects. In a level like Gaspar, that could be trying to deal with, as you'd have to be really on point with your shots. In Going Commando, all you have to do is strafe out of the way when the enemies attack you, and you can pretty consistently avoid taking a hit. In addition, Ratchet now comes to a stop much more naturally, and doesn't slip and slide around. His movement in general is very fluid and smooth, to the point that this control system would be used for the rest of the series on PS2. All in all, the game is a joy to control and a huge improvement over its predecessor in this regard alone. The control scheme isn't perfect though. One minor annoyance is that the camera seems to get a bit stuck if you strafe and it zooms in, like for instance if you're up against a wall. Thankfully, fixing it is as easy as stopping the strafe, and I would hardly say it harms gameplay to a significant degree, but it does still happen and I kinda wish it didn't. Much more significant is that there still isn't a way to turn the camera and shoot simultaneously. I didn't mind this as much in Ratchet 1 since the more defensive combat system made it so you'd barely have to do so anyway. But in Ratchet 2, where you can strafe, it's a bit more noticeable. To shoot, you have to take your right thumb off the stick and press circle, so you have to move the camera into place and then shoot, which can be hard to do with moving targets. Usually I can live with the system we have, but there are some moments where I wished I had the ability to turn and shoot. Apart from those things though, I really have nothing to complain about with how this game controls. It is, as I said, very responsive and easy to get to grips with, as opposed to the first game where there was somewhat of a steep learning curve for newcomers. Honestly, if this was the only major improvement Ratchet 2 made over the first game, it would still be looking at a pretty good review, but it also makes more changes that further pave over some of that game's weaker aspects that I pointed out in the last review. The most noticeable addition to Going Commando has to be the RPG elements, which would become staples of the series going forward. They take the form of the level up systems. As you kill enemies, you'll notice meters filling up underneath your weapon and health bar. As you should be able to guess, filling up either of these levels up your weapon or health meter. Health upgrades cost a shit ton of bolts in Ratchet 1, but here you can get them for free just by fighting enemies, further strengthening that positive feedback loop of engagement I've mentioned and will continue to mention in these videos. Getting one of these upgrades is also satisfying in itself, because it fully replenishes your health and creates a huge screen nuke that damages every enemy on screen. I can't get enough of it. As for the weapon upgrades, I think that would be better saved for when I discuss the roster of weapons later on. These RPG elements make the game even more fun to play and engage with, and I'm glad the later sequels kept them as a central element. Additionally, Ratchet 2 is the first game to add armor to the series. The first game didn't have anything of the sort, but it wasn't really needed since everything did 1 HP unit of damage. In the sequel, where you can upgrade your health bar to be really long, that would make things far too easy, so enemy damage gradually increases as the game goes on. To combat this, you can now buy armor from a special vendor to decrease the amount of damage you take. The system isn't very customizable, as the only thing each armor does is reduce damage, but I appreciate it nonetheless. However, quite possibly the most significant improvement Ratchet & Clank Going Commando makes over its predecessor is the bolt management. In the original game, bolts weren't very plentiful, meaning something that cost even 2,000 was a relatively big expense. The weapons cost a lot of money and there were plenty of paywalls throughout the game, and on top of that, the game had no way to earn bolts quickly and efficiently, besides replaying levels over and over, or this one glitch in Railguard. Ratchet 2, by contrast, has a much more efficient bolt economy in general. For one, every bolt is now worth more than just a single one, so you can pick up a few individual bolts and you'll get more than what you visibly collect. As a result, you'll be earning them far more quickly, and after just one stage I sometimes found myself earning 20,000 or more. The paywalls, weapons, and gadgets now cost more to compensate, but since you can earn your money back pretty quickly, I don't really mind that much. Which is where the second, more important improvement in this area comes in. Ratchet 2 just has way more optional stuff that allow you to compete in challenges to earn money. The game has these segments where you control Ratchet's ship in an open area, kinda like the all-range modes from Star Fox. On their own, these segments are just okay, nothing too special, but the later ones have the optional challenges that will net you tens of thousands of bolts upon completion. In addition, you have the 2 crystal hunts, taking place on planets Tabora and Grelban. They're run by this New Age mystic character, who is far and away one of the funniest in the series.
Hey, that's my ship! Possession is an illusion. Do not all things belong to the cosmos?
My guy, you sound like you've been on Facebook for way too long. Next you're gonna probably tell me all the planets are flat or something. The one on Tabora has you hunt down crystals, and the other one contains moonstones. No, not that moonstone, this one. You first have to get a certain amount of them for the mystic to help you, and any you give him after that will count towards some extra bolts. And when I say some extra bolts, I mean a lot of extra bolts. I actually managed to find every last desert crystal, and I have no shame in saying that whatsoever. I can't really say the same about Grelbin though, those damn Yetis were too much of a pain in my ass. But apparently the people at Insomniac thought that too, because during the editing of this video I actually found out that there's an award they give people based on the Yetis here. It's awarded to the person who made the worst element of the game. I don't know what to say to that. I can't make this shit up if I try. The best method to earn bolts in this game is, you guessed it, the arena battles. Twice in the game, you'll come across one of these and will have to compete in a few combat challenges to earn story essential gadgets. Once you're done with that though, you can play optional challenges that allow you to earn further bolt rewards. Usually it involves clearing waves of enemies, fighting a boss, being restricted to a certain weapon, having to avoid damage, killing a set number of enemies in a time limit, or more. While some specific challenges can get slightly annoying, I generally enjoy doing them. It once again feeds back into that gameplay loop I keep mentioning. While in the arena, you can upgrade your weapons, level up your health, earn extra bolts from defeating enemies, all the while working towards completing the challenge and getting a sum of bolts. This system is just masterfully woven into the core gameplay, and it makes me want to consistently go back to the arenas and keep playing them because they're so much damn fun. I do wish you didn't have to ride the slow taxi back in the Megacore games, though that shit's just boring. Overall, this game manages to almost completely eliminate any issues with bolt management from last time around. I'm still not a fan of the NPC paywalls, but they never cost any more than 40,000, which really isn't a whole lot in this game. I can't really say much more here. This game just makes so many improvements to the series that make it even more fun than its already great predecessor. Let's get back to the story for a little bit. The dynamic of Ratchet & Clank 2's plot once again changes around a third of the way through. Ratchet and Clank finally catch up with the thief on planet Siberius, and it seems like the game is about to come to an end. They pursue him to a gigantic train, which is always an awesome set piece in any game. While the train is still in motion, the two battle the thief, eventually coming to a stop at a big platform in an icy lake. Once the duo finish him off, the thief flees, and they report back to Fizzwidget to tell him that they now have the experiment. He instructs them to meet him on the desert planet Tabora.
Megacorp Manufacturing and Mining, a tireless drum major leading the galaxy on its march of progress. Come tour our desert mining facility and see why our most precious product is our history. When we first arrived, we found a planet completely overrun by rainforest. To better accommodate the local wildlife, we transformed this impassable jungle into an easily navigable desert. Ever the technological pioneer, Megacorp invented the automated management team, thereby eliminating costly upward mobility, and all the while making your life richer. Megacorp Manufacturing and Mining. Our march continues to the tune of progress and profitability. Call Investor Relations today.
Yeah, Tabora actually used to be covered in jungles until Megacorp came along and destroyed it, causing it to become a huge wasteland. That context makes the otherwise standard desert theme feel more interesting. Anyways, once Ratchet and Clank get to the planet, Fizzwidget shows up and crushes their ship with his. It was supposedly an accident, and he brushes it off and asks for the experiment. Clank gives it to him, and the three get into his ship to go back to the HQ. However, this happens.
Just sit back and relax, boys. How about a little flying music?
Yeah, clearly something fishy is going on here. Almost like everything that Fizzwidget just did wasn't on accident at all. Ratchet and Clank end up in a cave system, and as soon as they make it to the surface, they're confronted by the thief. He demands the experiment, falls over, and as it turns out, the thief was actually a female Lombax all along, named Angela Cross. The duo tell her that they've already given the experiment to Fizzwidget, which has apparently put the entire galaxy in danger. After fixing up their ship with the help of the New Age Mystic, the two of them blast off and travel to the planet that Angela told them to go to. Within a few levels, the dynamic of the story has completely changed. It started off as a seemingly simple chase the thief and retrieve what they stole plot, but as soon as you reach the 1/3 mark, things turn out to be more complicated than they initially seemed. If what Angela says is correct, then literally everything Fizzwidget established in the opening cutscene is a bucket of lies, and underneath all of it is some sort of conspiracy. It's genuinely fascinating to watch it all unfold in front of your eyes, and as early as the next cutscene, we finally get a true idea of what's going on. The infobot that Angela showed Ratchet and Clank a few minutes ago contained the coordinates for planet Dabo, a Megacorp testing facility. Our heroes make their way through the factory and to the main computer system so they can reactivate the power. For the low price of 10,000 bolts, of course.
What? Now even the computers are charging us? That's it. This galaxy blows.
They're shown a video that reveals the horrific truth. The experiment is hostile and impossible to tame, and Megacorp had planned to destroy it. The two will try to warn Fizzwidget about this, but he basically brushes them off and doesn't listen, which only raises more suspicion to the old man, almost like he knows and is deliberately ignoring the two. Immediately afterwards, Thugs for Less receives the call and is now employed by someone new. Yeah, the second after Fizzwidget finds out that Ratchet and Clank now know of the experiment's dangerous properties, Thugs for Less just gets a call from an unknown party out of the blue. The CEO even says the things this mysterious caller wants them to do would be a conflict of interest with their previous employer, Angela, indicating that this party is wholly opposed to her and what she's doing. It's clear as day now that things aren't what they seem. Every passing cutscene keeps hinting that Megacorp is up to no good, and that Fizzwidget isn't exactly to be trusted. Honestly, I really enjoy when a story isn't what it seems, and more twists occur as it goes on, just like it does in this game. It's funny, I've been talking about this game for a while now, and I haven't even mentioned one of the most essential elements to a Ratchet and Clank title yet, the weapons and gadgets. The first game established the formula of the series as a third-person shooter with platforming elements, in which you use alien weaponry and gadgets to get around the environment and blow shit up. I thought the weapons in combat were one of the original game's strongest aspects. Its weapons were very punchy and satisfying to use in general, making combat a blast, no pun intended, even if its play control was somewhat clunky. Going Commando managed to fix most of those problems as I outlined earlier, making its combat even more fun than Ratchet 1. However, that game also had the issue that only a few weapons were useful in a pinch, meaning the combat was far more defensive and emphasized taking out foes from a distance, which was fine but not ideal. Ratchet 2, to no one's surprise, also improves upon this aspect, and I think the roster of weapons is even better here. Practically every weapon you can buy is viable for a variety of situations, which offers a lot more freedom in how you approach combat. There is still the occasional moment where some weapons perform better than others, but those are relatively few and far between. You start the game off with the Lancer and Gravity Bomb, a blaster and bomb gun respectively. Both are fairly decent weapons, especially for the start of the game, but as it goes on you'll be able to buy even better options. Some of my favorites include the Mini Turret Glove, which allows you to lay down sentry guns that automatically shoot at enemies, the Mini Rocket Tube, a straightforward direct shot rocket launcher perfect for taking out enemies above you, the Blitz Gun, a punchy shotgun weapon that I find fun to use just because of the sound effects, and the Plasma Coil, a pistol which shoots out an electric blast that harms multiple enemies in a small vicinity. Hell, they even bring back a few of the Gadgetron weapons from Ratchet 1. On Barlow, you run into this robot lady who sells them, even giving them to you for free if you have a Ratchet 1 save file with the weapons on it. Yeah, as early as the second game, they're making callbacks to the previous one, giving you perks or benefits for playing it. It's the reason why I think these games are best experienced in release order, because you'd otherwise lose out on this extra detail in world building. Sure, the Gadgetron weapons do get outclassed later on, emphasizing just how much stronger Megacorp is in this galaxy, but it's still a pretty neat novelty, and I found myself using a few of them in the early stages. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention what is probably the best weapon in the series, the Bouncer. It sounds silly based on the name alone, but trust me when I say that this thing packs a serious punch. When you spend that 100,000 bolts on it, something that shouldn't be too bad as you unlock it on Tabora, where you can get loads of bolts from crystals, you won't regret it. This huge thundergun looking thing fires a metal ball that explodes into a crowd of smaller bombs, all of which track down enemies and blow them up. It does an assload of damage, the sound effects are amazing. All in all, it's an essential weapon to have in your arsenal. That said, it's still advantageous to use the other weapons alongside it, as they may be better suited to some scenarios. The Bouncer is a great weapon, but it isn't a flat-out, all-purpose wonder weapon. You will have to switch and experiment with the other parts of your loadout, which is a welcome bit of balancing added to the mix. Things get even crazier when you upgrade the weapons. I mentioned this a bit ago, but as you kill enemies, a small meter fills up under your weapon's icon. If you manage to fill it completely, the weapon changes and becomes much more powerful, complete with a new name. For example, the Heavy Lancer fires a lot quicker, the Gravity Bomb becomes the Mini Nuke and causes a mushroom cloud, and the Mini Turret Glove morphs into the Mega Turret Glove, allowing you to place even larger turrets that fire rockets. Of course, there's also the Heavy Bouncer. Yeah, sorta speaks for itself. Easily the most essential weapon to have, as I said. I mean, just look at what it does to Chainblade in the B2 Brawler.
Please welcome
Funny story, I actually remember my first time seeing this thing blow those bosses up. It did a little bit of damage, and then their health bar just instantly evaporated and I couldn't stop laughing. These bosses actually required a fair bit of strategy before, but now you can obliterate them like this, and it's so good for the soul. The roster of gadgets in this game is pretty decent as well, but there's also a few I don't really care for as much. For instance, I'm not the biggest fan of the glider because its control is a bit stiff and it's too easy to slam into walls on accident. Thankfully, its sections are pretty short. The one I really don't care for is the Hypnomatic. Even assembling it is a bit of a drag, as you have to find the parts on multiple planets, and assembling it requires a bit of backtracking between them. Once you do get to use it, you find out that it really isn't all that great. You take control of a small robot and have a limited time to complete some short but still annoying sections, usually involving killing other robots or hitting switches. It doesn't feel as fleshed out as it should, and its sections are one of the game's lower points. I also don't care for the door puzzles. This game has two, the Electrolyzer and the Infiltrator. The former sees you pressing circle to flip panels and line them up so electric pulses can hit them, and the latter requires you to take the correct path around a sphere. Honestly, they're just pace breakers. Neither takes too long, at least for the most part, but that doesn't stop these short instances from being boring. Much like the first game though, the gadgets that are good are really good. You've got your standard thruster pack, which you select from the menu, the swing shot, and the grind boots, all of which work exactly the same as the first title. No new commentary to add here, they're just as fun as they were to begin with, and I'm glad you don't have to buy them again. The magnet boots, now called the gravity boots, are also hugely improved. Here you can actually move around like normal and use your weapon, so it's closer to how the gravity mechanics work in Mario Galaxy, hence the name change for the item, which is a welcome improvement if you ask me. In addition, the game has several new gadgets of its own that are pretty cool. There's the Dynamo, which makes platforms appear when you activate its receptacles, the Tractor Beam, which lets you grab objects with the gadget's icon on them, which is used in some neat puzzles, the Therminator, a hand cannon that's used to freeze water or melt ice in its own puzzle segments, and the Levitator, which allows you to fly from its specific paths and gets used in some vertical platforming sections. All four of these have one thing in common, and that's the fact that they're utilized to supplement the core gameplay and diversify the platforming elements. As a result, I enjoy using them quite a bit and consider those sections some of my favorite parts of the game. It's always fun when developers take their ideas and play around with them for a little while, which Insomniac did very well here. On the topic of level design, let's discuss that. Like I always say, it's definitely one of the most crucial things a platforming game like this can get right, if not the most central element. Ratchet & Clank 1 passed this test, and featured really solid stage design that took advantage of the game's mechanics, whether combat or movement. Ratchet & Clank Going Commando continues this quality standard, and has some of the series' best levels. Just like the first game, Going Commando disguises its set pieces in the stage environments, and attempts to make its platforming sequences look like actual places you're going through, rather than just floating blocks or platforms. I love it when games do this, since it gives the stages a lot more personality. On the whole, Ratchet 2's levels feature their own great ideas. This game just has so many memorable moments, such as making your way through a prison ship when the leads get incarcerated by thugs for less, hunting for crystals and traversing cliffs and caverns in Tabora, infiltrating the thug HQ and fighting some of the toughest enemies in the game on Snivelak, flying across sky-high platforms with the Levitator and Megacorp's distribution facility on Smog, busting into the Megacorp armory on Todano, and more. It's a consistently engaging collection of levels that goes wild with each and every one of its ideas. Not to mention, it's quite challenging too. I'd argue that Going Commando is actually the hardest game in the series, or at least the most difficult of the first four. Of course, this isn't a problem at all. Even when the game gets hard, I never got frustrated or anything, because it's also very fair and rewarding. Like Ratchet 1, I saw each death as an opportunity to earn more money and upgrade my health and weapons. What can I say? Just like the first game, Ratchet 2 doesn't waste your time. On top of the level set pieces themselves, this game also features the same satisfying planetary exploration that the first game did, but even better. In Ratchet 1, missions on each planet were delineated by different branching pathways. Alongside the beaten paths, though, it also had a few hidden sections accessed by looking around a bit that contain their own secrets or what have you. Going Commando continues this tradition. Admittedly, it does seem a little more focused on shooting than the first game, due in large part to the improved combat mechanics. I don't mind this in principle, since the shooting was always one of the strongest parts of these games for me. That said, it still has its fair share of exploration, sometimes even hiding optional gadgets in some places. For example, on Uzla, you'll come across this wall that looks like you can scale somehow, but can't yet. You'll have to come back later with the gravity boots, which lets you climb up there and fight an optional secret boss. Upon defeating it, you get the box breaker, which lets you slam your wrench to destroy crates or objects that drop bolts in your vicinity. That's only one moment among numerous others, and they add to the satisfaction of playing this already rewarding game. As the running theme in this review goes, Going Commando also makes several improvements over the stage design of the first game that serve to make it more enjoyable in general. For one, I already talked about the improved controls, which help a lot. They make movement through the game a lot more free-flowing and precise. This game is also the first one in the series to mark checkpoints. I complained about that in my Ratchet 1 review a little bit, but here they've answered my prayers. Whenever you reach a checkpoint, this continue point text appears on screen, letting you know that you've responded respawn here after dying. Much like Super Mario Galaxy 2, this improvement is important to make to any first entry that lacks such a thing, and it makes deaths come off as less annoying because you know exactly how far back you'll end up. The only real criticism with the stage design I can even think of is the moments when a bunch of enemies appear in waves. You'll kill a few of them, and then more will either materialize in front of you or come out of small alcoves, which can occasionally catch you off guard. Other than that, however, I really have almost nothing negative to say about this game's levels. They're a masterclass in third-person shooter platformer level design. Where more of the negatives with Ratchet 2 as a gameplay experience do arise is in a few assorted types of gameplay. Ratchet & Clank 1 had a few of these, and so does Going Commando. These usually come off as pace breakers to me personally, much like the original. Clank sections make a return, and just like Ratchet 1, they're slow and kind of boring. They do try to spruce it up a bit by adding a bridge bot to cross gaps, a hammer bot that can smash obstacles, and a bot that can lift doors open. And they do have some platforming with Clank's helipack functionality, but these parts of the game still amount to walking over to the place you need to go, selecting commands, and putting gadget bots into holes so you can progress and repeat the process again, really slowly. At one point, one of the gadget bots even glitched off the bridge and got stuck in a hole, so I had to reload the last checkpoint and replay this tiny section all over again. I get that the series is called Ratchet & Clank, so they want you to play as Clank sometimes, but I don't see why doing so necessitates making a section so slow and plotting. In addition, you have the minigames, which are mixed in quality for me. The ship sections are better than they were in Ratchet 1, though still not that hard. I did already say they're a great resource to earn bolts, but the required ship missions for the main story aren't my favorite. Without upgrading your ship, the later sections can get fairly frustrating, but if you spend Raritanium and Slimcognito's Ship Shack to get the fusion laser cannons and advanced shielding system, you'll breeze through every dogfight like it's nobody's business. In general, not awful segments, but nothing special. Much worse is the racing minigames. The hoverboard races in Ratchet 1 were already a pain in the ass, and these aren't much better. The turning is stiff, hitting anything instantly explodes your vehicle and essentially forces a restart, and they feel a bit too long just like Ratchet 1's hoverboards. Admittedly, the first one on Barlow isn't that bad, but the second instance on Joba can kiss you know what I mean. The course is just way too close quarters for its own good, and there's way too many hazards you can run into. Thankfully, this second race is optional and all you get are the charge boots, but in my opinion, that doesn't fully excuse it from criticism. Ratchet 2 also takes Giant Clank and makes it a more fleshed out minigame. I barely mentioned Giant Clank in Ratchet 1 because you only used him in a couple of brief segments that didn't really amount to anything besides momentary spectacle. In this game though, you'll play as Giant Clank in two dedicated sections, once on Dabo and again on Demoozle. Both of them are giant boss fights where you face off against another giant enemy, whether it's the thug leader or this damn UFO. I used to really hate these sections, but now, they're a bit obnoxious, but pretty easy on the whole and really short too. The problem is these additional enemies that constantly shoot at you, which can drain your health bar very quickly. These just feel like wars of attrition, and I wouldn't have minded if they were cut from the game, since they don't add much. On the bright side though, Going Commando carries over the giant bolts in challenge mode from previous title. Each level has platinum bolts hidden throughout, just like gold bolts. I'm not one to go after all of them once again, since I got my fill from the main campaign itself, but I appreciate the extra content for completionists, and at least they have a practical purpose in this game. You can use them to purchase weapon upgrades from Slimcognito.
Put it in the slot. The weapon you want modified, put it in the slot.
Oh, I get it. You make weapon modifications.
Such as Lock-On or an Acid mod. Weapon upgrades wouldn't be explored more in depth until Deadlocked, but I still like that this is here. Challenge mode once again unlocks after you defeat the final boss, and starts you off on a new game with all the weapons and armor you bought from the previous playthrough. Again, this isn't something I play because I just finished the game and got my fill already, but I still like that this is here. Once again, Ratchet & Clank Going Commando is a game that's so engaging that I never want to put the controller down and stop playing it. By the end of the game, the story also ramps up quite a bit as all the looming questions get answered once and for all. Eventually, Angela reveals that the experiment, or the protopet as it's officially called, is about to be sold as a commercial product by Megacorp. Unsurprisingly, this will cause detrimental effects to the galaxy, so Ratchet & Clank immediately search for Fizzwidget, who is supposedly on planet Boldan. However, as soon as they arrive there, they discover that it was a trap and get arrested by thugs for less. As the cutscene after Dabo implied, they were in fact hired by Megacorp, and the duo are imprisoned on the mercenary group's prison ship. The two then manage to escape and discover that Angela was captured by thugs for less and brought to their HQ on Snivelak. They immediately make their way there, battle through some of the toughest enemy forces in the game, and come face to face with the thug leader again, now in a gigantic mech and holding Angela hostage within him.
What's so funny?
Nothing, I guess. Prepare to die!
They then face off in what is the most tedious moment of the game. The boss just takes way too long and has you using these turrets which do the most minuscule of chip damage. I wouldn't call it difficult, but it is a little bit too much to redo if you fuck it up right at the end. Regardless, after that fight is over, we get a bombshell of sorts. Angela used to work in Megacorp's genetics division and was about to fix the flaws of the prototype before Fizzwidget suddenly pushed up the release date. In order to put a stop to the crisis that's about to ensue, the three will have to break into Megacorp headquarters. Angela needs to get to her ID so they can get in, and meanwhile Ratchet and Clank travel across a couple more planets and try their best to disrupt the protopet shipments. On my first playthrough, the twist that Angela used to work for Megacorp actually surprised me a bit, and basically confirmed that not a single thing Fizzwidget tells you in the intro is true. This game started off with what seemed like a straight line plot, but it's masterfully thrown in twists and turns to surprise the audience and make them think a bit deeper about everything. I'm not saying it's high art that only the most sophisticated analysts can ever hope to understand. My point is that for a video game, this is a really well done story on the whole. Anyway, I've been going on for a while. We've got to wrap this up at some point, lest we be here all day. Angela and our heroes reunite at her house on Grelvin and plan their final attack on the Megacorp HQ on planet Yeetle. She mentions in passing that the orbital defenses are some of the strongest in the galaxy, which is actually a leftover from when there was one last ship section before it got cut from the game. I personally agree with the decision to remove it, since that would have broken the pacing of the finale. So let's get into it and put a stop to this protopet menace. Honestly, compared to Velden in Peril from the last game, Yeetle was a little bit underwhelming. It isn't a bad stage by any means, and even has some fun combat sequences, but it generally feels like just another industrial stage, rather than this huge climactic finale as it ideally would. Regardless, once you reach the center of the facility, Clank's girlfriend that he met earlier in the game appears to warn them, and drops the biggest plot twist in the whole game thus far. I'll let the game do the talking for me.
Now that I've sold my 1 millionth hygienator, I can finance the comeback of the greatest superhero who ever lived, Captain Quark! All I need now is a new galaxy with a new fan base so I can rescue them from a new disaster!
But
Sir, I do not understand.
Mr. Fizzwidget?
This is bad.
Yes, that's right. Fizzwidget was actually Captain Quark all along. If the twist with Angela surprised me a bit earlier, then this one actually made me say holy shit out loud. Looking back, they actually foreshadowed this quite well. Throughout the game, Ratchet and Clank tuned into more episodes of Behind the Hero, all of which focus on the story of Quark following the first game. He earned tons of money selling fraudulent personal hygienators, but was eventually found out and arrested. Quark then escaped to the Bogon Galaxy through the toilet, trapped Fizzwidget in a broom closet, and impersonated him to manufacture a crisis with the protopet. He now plans to defeat the original one live on TV, so he can fabricate a superficial heroic image for himself and gain an undeserved fan base like he used to have. Easily his slimiest moment as a character. He tries to use the helixomorph Angela invented, but it causes the protopet to mutate, grow huge, and eat him alive. Ratchet and Clank now have to get in there and neutralize the protopet so Angela can fix it up and stop the crisis. This final boss is probably the weakest in the PS2 games for the simple reason that it goes down way too quickly. Yeah, the fight against Drek was flawed and may have taken way too long, but I thought that boss was more memorable. Using the heavy bouncer, I was able to beat the protopet in about 2 minutes, and it was just kind of underwhelming, which is a shame after all the incredible build-up throughout the game. Once the protopet is neutralized, it spits out Captain Quark, and the real Fizzwidget is freed. Angela then takes the helixomorph and returns the protopet to its normal size with its violent tendencies gone. Turns out the battery was just in backwards all along. Oops. Anywho, the heroes then get to the radio system to amplify the helixomorph signal and end the protopet epidemic, after which they all return to Clank's apartment to settle down. I wouldn't call this ending bad, but it does feel a little bit rushed with how quickly it happens. It's okay though, no game is perfect, so I can get over it. Once again, I think I've stated it all by this point. Ratchet and Clank Going Commando is incredible, and by far one of my favorite games on the PlayStation 2. This is another example of a perfect sequel, alongside Sonic Adventure 2 or Diddy's Conquest. Ratchet and Clank was already a great game, but it still had several flaws that could be rectified in a sequel. That's exactly what Going Commando does, and it's amazing just how much it manages to improve. The story is even more interesting, the satire and social commentary are just as entertaining, the graphics are even more gorgeous, the game supports more advanced video options, the weapons are even better, the controls have been tremendously cleaned up, the strafe basically eliminates all previous issues with combat, the bolts are more plentiful both because of the arena battles and minigames, and the fact that each one earns you more. The platforming is more interesting and challenging on the whole, there's now an armor system to reduce damage, you can upgrade your health and weapons through playing the game even more. This game takes virtually everything the first one did and does it even better. It isn't perfect, as it still has a few pace breakers here and there. The music isn't as memorable as Ratchet 1, though still great in its own right, and the ending feels a little rushed, but none of these things prevent me from considering this one of the Ratchet & Clank series' greatest outings, and I can easily see why so many people consider it their favorite. As I mentioned earlier though, despite how great it is, Ratchet 2 isn't my favorite in the series. It's undeniably an incredible game, but it still has a few minor elements that could use streamlining or polishing up. What my favorite in the series is remains to be seen. This retrospective is just getting started, and we still have a good 4 more games to cover. Next time I'll be talking about this game's direct sequel, Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, which came out a year later in 2004, also on the PS2. You'll want to brace yourselves for that one, since I'm going to have a lot to say about that game, and you know how carried away I can get with these things. In any event, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next review. See you later.
All right, fellas, nice and tight now. So you tested this, right? Oh, wait, that's why I'm here. Oh, one more thing.